Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up the articles from the Hindu and discuss them as per the demands of Civil Services Examination. The topics of the discussion are listed on your screen. Moving to the first article of the day that has featured on page 4 of the Hindu, basically highlights a case study for us. As a temple in Tamil Nadu village opens its door for the Dalits for the first time. Now, case studies are part of GS4 syllabus of UPSC, and the syllabus mentions various case studies arising out of dilemmas and the ethical conflicts that are present in the society. Now, this particular case involves the issue of Sri Vardharaja Perumal temple, where Dalits have entered for the first time. Amid police protection, around 250 Dalits marched 1 kilometer carrying garlands and fruits, and then entered the temple, which is under Department of Hindu Religious and Charitable Endowment, and offered their worship. One of the devotees visiting the temple said the temple is said to be 200 years old and Dalits had been barred entry from the very beginning. He further exclaimed that they had repeatedly requested the caste Hindus to permit us to participate in the temple procession, but the caste Hindus have refused and even suspended the procession in 2008. And this movement highlighted the entering of temple for the first time in their lives, and they thanked the district administration and police for considering their request. Further, the official sources said that a dictate barred the Dalits from entering the temple. As Dalits petitioned the district administration, the Kallakurchi Revenue Divisional Officer S. Pavitra held a peace meeting with both the sides and told them no one had the right to prevent anyone from worshipping at the temple. This is said to be the first time in the village history that Dalits have formally entered the temple. For such an occasion where 250 Dalits entered the temple, over 300 personnel of police were deployed in village to prevent any untoward incident. There are many other temples in the country where today the entry of Dalits is banned. In the line of this issue, we'll try to analyze the article from the ethical perspective, that what are the ethical issues that are involved when a person from particular caste is being restricted to enter into a temple or any other public space that should be generally open for all. The first ethical issue that involves here is that of prevailing irrationality in the society. Now, caste-based discrimination in Indian society is not only irrational but also has an inhuman face to itself. It is given in this case that Dalits were barred from entering in the temple for 200 years. This kind of discrimination is not only limited to temple but is reflected in other sphere also, which highlights some or other form of socio-economic disability. For example, in many rural areas, untouchability is still being practiced. The second ethical case that it highlights, or the second ethical issue that this case highlights, is the failure of the state to enable social contract. Now, under the social contract theory, the state is liable to ensure justice to each of its subjects, but there in this case, Dalits were barred from entering into a temple for the last 200 years. This shows that the social contract theory, which confers the idea of contract between a state and the subject, is violated here, and shows that in the name of law, state has failed to provide due justice to a large section of the society. The third issue highlighted here is the lack of tolerance. Now, in this particular case, even after 75 years of adopting democracy, the Dalits had to formally protest for their rights, and they need police protection to enjoy their very basic constitutional and human right, that is to worship. This highlights intolerance of upper caste towards their fellow citizens. Another ethical issue that is highlighted in the case is the societal harm in the longer run. Because though teleological philosophy advocates greatest good of the greatest number, or the utilitarian approach highlights the same, but such discriminatory social norm may harm the society at large. Because this kind of ideology promotes enmity among various groups of the society, which may hamper peace and moral order in the society in the longer run. Another ethical issue that can be highlighted from this case is of pseudo-modernization. Most of the Indians consider themselves today as modern citizens, but here in this case, we are witnessing that only Dalits were fighting for their human right. that is the right to equality. But in a modern rational society, every man should raise his voice against any kind of atrocity against anyone. In this case, we can also quote a very popular saying that says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The last ethical issue that is highlighted by this is the slow pace of accepting humanitarian value. Now, in a caste ridden Indian society, universal rational values are being accepted at a very slow pace because even after 75 years of the adaptation of constitution and its ideals, such discriminations are evident in the society. So, the age old traditions and practices are still gaining momentum or still having traction over the humanitarian values. So, with this case, we have seen what are the ethical issues that are involved in this particular temple entry case, or can also be highlighted against any other case that involves discrimination on the basis of caste or religion. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured in the Hindu basically talks about the issue of prison reforms or towards reducing the India's prison footprint, basically reforming the prisons and addressing the need of the prisoners. Now this topic falls under the GS2 syllabus of our examination, and the article is in news because President of India Srimati Draupadi Murmu, while delivering the valedictory address at the Constitution Day celebrations in November, highlighted about the situation of Indian prisons. She suggested that the problems of overcrowding of Indian prisons should not be solved by making poor prisons, rather than the approach should be releasing unwell or old inmates, reducing the penalties, allowing bail at affordable cost, employing anti-carceral ways of holding people accountable for their crimes, and expediting trials. Further, the article also talks about speedy delivery of justice, which will require a collaboration among the executive, judiciary, and the legislature to evolve an effective dispute resolution mechanism to mitigate the people's plight. Thus, there is a need to make more preventive measures rather than taking deterrent measures, which call for an eye for eye, is recommended under the article. Through this article, we will try to understand what basically is a prison, what are the major challenges that the prisons or the prisoners undergoes. We'll also try to analyze the case of Indian prisons through the Prison Statistics Report of 2021. And at the last, we'll try to recommend some of the measures that can be adopted to improve the picture of Indian prisons. Now, the Prisons Act 1894 defines a prison as a jail or a place that can be used permanently or temporarily under general or special orders of a state government for the detention of prisoners and include all lands, buildings thereto, but it will not include any place or confinement of prisoners who are exclusively in the custody of police, any place specially appointed by the state government, any place which has been declared by the state government by general or special order to be a subsidiary jail. Through this act, it is clear that all the powers related to prisons are with the state government, or prison is a state subject. Now, prison exists at three levels. The first is the taluk level, second is the district level, and third is the zonal or the range level. At taluk level, it is the sub-jail. At district level, there is presence of district jail. And at zonal level, there is the presence of central jail. Now, the Prison Statistics of India report of 2021 highlighted that the Indian prisons are facing basically three structural constraints related to overcrowding, understaffing, and underfunding. The inevitable outcome is subhuman living conditions, poor hygiene, and violent clashes that are resulting in this. The report also highlighted that the state of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar account for maximum number of prisoners in the jail. This report was published by National Crime Record Bureau. Now we will try to analyze what are the basic issues that these prisons face today. The first issue as highlighted here is that of overcrowded jails. Now if we see the first infographic, we can see that the occupancy rate is on the higher side. Though there was a marginal dip in the year 2020, but the occupancy rate today persists at around 130%. Now occupancy rate here means the number of inmates that are staying in jail against the authorized capacity of 100 inmates. So, if the capacity is of 100 inmates, there are 130 inmates that are staying in that jail. Though there is also a good picture which highlights that the occupancy rate of Indian prisons have decreased from 140% in 2007-2008 to 118% in 2020. However, there has been a recent increase to the level of 130%. And district jails were on the first position of higher occupancy. This overcrowding of jails is a major problem that the prisons are today facing. The second problem faced by prisons today is the domination by the under trials. Now, if we again look at the infographic, it is very clear that the number of under trials have been increasing over the year. Now, we need to first understand what basically are the under trials. Under trial prisoners are those accused facing trial in any court, and during such trial they are kept in judicial custody in prison. When the under trial prisoners are kept in prison, it alters the basic criminal jurisprudence which believes that an accused, unless proven guilty, cannot be considered as criminals in the eyes of law. And these under trials face a majority of problems as they are subjected to psychological and physical deprivations of jail life. Their socio-economic standing is also affected as there is loss of jobs and the social stigma attached to being in jail. And also, majority of under trials in India lacks legal aid. They are lacking the legal awareness and the necessary means to approach the court. The third major issue facing the prisons today is the increasing number of unnatural deaths in the recent times. Now, the number of deaths in the prison have increased from 1887 in 2020 to 2116 in 2021. So, there is an increase of approximately 12%. The worrying trend here is the unnatural number of deaths that are increasing. Unnatural deaths due to suicide, murder by inmates, death due to assault by outside elements, deaths due to firing, death due to negligence, accidental deaths inside the prisons are also increasing. Suicide under the category of unnatural death has been further categorized into hanging, poisoning, self-inflicted injury, drug overdose, etc. And all these are on a rise. Though in 2021 there was a minimum dip of 2%, but on a whole, if we see along the years, the number of unnatural deaths in the Indian prisons have been increasing. Moving on to the next set of challenge that the Indian prisons today face is that of understaffing of the prisons. As per the Prison Statistics Report, the sanctioned strength of jail staff was around 89,479, while the actual strength that was realized was only 64,449. And this is due to the vacancies that are not being filled up. So there is a need to understand and fill up the vacancies of the prison staffs in India. The next issue that prisons today face is due to the judicial backlogs. The judicial system in India is under tremendous pressure. We have seen in our discussions on judiciary that there is a huge pendency of cases at the level of different courts across the country, and hence there is a need to reduce the disposal time of cases and also to better case clearance rate. The reduction in the disposal time, that is the time span between the date of filing and date when the decision is passed, and in the case clearance rate, that is CCR, which highlights the ratio of number of cases that are disposed in a given year to the number of cases that were filed, will be used to understand the efficiency of the system. Further, the next set of issues that the Indian prisons today face is the systematic discrimination. There is rampant corruption in the prison system which results in discrimination which is based on economic situation of a prisoner. The socially economically disadvantaged prisoners are deprived of basic human dignity and are also often subjected to cruel torture. As a matter of fact, the Dalits and the Adivasis are overrepresented in Indian prisons. For example, some of the jail manuals continue to focus on purity as prescribed in the caste system today. and assign work in prison based on prisoners' caste identity. Further, legislation like Habitual Offenders Act, Begari law allows the police to target them for the reported crimes and thus will highlight the increased number of Dalits and Adivasis or tribals and their overrepresentation in the Indian prison. The next set of challenge or issue that the Indian prisons today face is poor physical and mental health. In prison, the problem of overcrowding, poor sanitary facilities, lack of physical and mental activities, lack of decent health care, health problems are rampant. Further, the mental health care has a negligible focus in the Indian prisons. Indian prisons today also lack any kind of reformative approach. Absence of reformative approach in Indian prison has not only resulted in the ineffective integration with the society, but has also failed to provide productive engagement opportunities for the prisoners once they are released and are ready to become part of the society again. So this brings us to the logical question that what needs to be done? What steps needs to be taken to improve the condition of the prison? The first step in this regard that can be taken is follow the new prison manual of 2016. The Ministry of Home Affairs has approved the new prison manual of 2016, which aims at uniformity in laws, rules, and regulation governing the administration of prisons and the management of prisoners across India. Now, these prison manual was released as prison today is a state subject. Approval of this prison manual is based on Article 39A of the Constitution, which calls for free legal aid to the poor and the weaker sections of the society and seek to ensure justice for all. Now, some of the provisions of the prison manual of 2016 guarantees under trial review committee to be set up in each district, earliest release of under trial as per the provisions of the law, annual review of the implementation of the Prison Manual Act, legal literacy classes for the prisoners, MIS system to be adopted in jails, and setting up of legal aid clinic in every prison. The second step that can be taken to improve the condition of Indian prison is the modernization of the prison scheme. This was launched in the year 2002-2003 with the objective of improving the condition of prisoners and prison personnel. And it will involve various components. For example, construction of new jails, repair and renovation of existing jails, and improvement in sanitation and water supply. The third step that can be taken in this regard is the implementation of e-prison project. Now we all know that prison is a state subject and modernization of prisons is undertaken by the respective state government. Now MHA is supporting the states in implementation of the e-prison project. The e-prison project supplements the Prisoners Information Management System, which was developed by National Information Center. This provides a centralized approach for recording and managing prisoners' information and generating different kind of reports, which includes prisoners' basic details, family details, biometrics, medical details, their case history, and the movement. This will be helpful in smooth functioning of the prison system and also to look after the status of prisoners. The next step that can be taken to improve the condition of prisons is that some under trials should be released on bail. The Law Commission of India had recommended that under trials who have completed 1/3 of their maximum sentence for offences attracting up to 7 years of imprisonment can be released on the bail. Free legal aid facility to under trial prisoners can also be given. Further, as a next step, special courts needs to be established. Special fast-track courts should be set up to deal exclusively with petty offences which have been pending for more than 5 years. Now, these petty offences are listed as where the imprisonment for the offence does not exceed a period of 3 years. As a next step of reform, there is a need to improve the capacity building of the prison staff. Further, there is a need to ensure post-release financial security for the prisoners. Wages that are paid to prisoners who are serving sentences should be increased and should be on par with the global benchmarks. This will encourage the prisoners to work hard and improve their savings for their life that is outside the prison. Further, there is a need for skill development of the prisoners. The concept of open jails or the open prisons should also be encouraged. Open jails basically are special jails that are exclusively confined for convicted prisoners. Convict prisoners with good behavior and which are satisfying certain norms prescribed in the prison rules are launched in open prisons. And minimum security is kept in such prisons and prisoners are engaged in agriculture activity. Further, at last there is a need for All India Jail Reforms Committee, National Prison Commission to oversee the modernization of prisons in India is thus important. At last we can say the use of information and communication technology is also important, as trials through video conferencing should be encouraged, especially this was recommended during the COVID times. And thus these steps need to be adopted as prison administration is an important component of the criminal justice system. These steps should be taken by prison administration to improve the condition of prisons in India and also to work towards behavioral change of convicts as well as the under trials. So these were the steps that are needed to reform the prisons in India. At the same time, we have also discussed what are the various issues that the prisons in India are facing. Moving on to the next topic of the day that has featured on page 1 of the Hindu, basically talks about the SC majority which has ruled in the favor of 2016 demonetization process. A majority of 4 judges on a constitution bench of the Supreme Court on Monday found that there was no flaw in the union government process to demonetize 500 and 1000 banknotes through a gazette notification in November 2016. Now this particular case highlights an interesting position as there was also a dissenting judgment. The dissenting judge was the sole woman judge on the 5-member bench, that was Justice B.V. Nagarthana, who disagreed with the majority, saying the government notification that was issued under Section 26(2) of the RBI Act was unlawful. She also highlighted the importance of Parliament. She described Parliament as a nation in miniature and said that without Parliament, democracy will not thrive. She also concluded that there was no meaningful application of mind by the Central Board to government initiatives for withdrawing the 500 and the 1000 notes, which formed 86% of the currency in circulation at that time, causing severe financial crunch and social economic despair for people at large. However, the majority, that is the 4 judges that were Justice B.R. Gavai, Justice S. Abdul Nazir, Justice A.S. Bopanna, and Justice V. Ramasubramaniam, pronounced that statutory procedure under Section 26(2) was not violated merely because the Central had taken the initiative to advise the Central Board to consider recommending the demonetization. Justice Gavai said that the RBI and the Centre had been in consultation with each other for a period of 6 months prior to the November 8 notification, and he rubbished the petitioner's argument that a hasty decision was taken to demonetize, noting that such measures undisputed are required to be taken with utmost confidentiality and speed. Justice Gavai held that demonetization was done for the proper purposes of eliminating fake currency, black money, and terror financing. He said there was a reasonable nexus between the measure of demonetization and its objectives. So the demonetization has been upheld now. We'll just have a brief look at why demonetization was adopted in 2016, what were the aims, and what was the positive and the negative impact of the same, just for the level of understanding. Now the demonetization in 2016 was adopted primarily for 4 reasons. The first reason was to curb corruption, that is, to decrease the supply of cash in the economy and to tackle the problem of corruption. The second reason was to tackle the counterfeit currency that was prevalent in India at that point of time and to ensure economic stability of our country. The third was the use of high denomination notes for terrorist activities to be stopped. And the fourth objective was accumulation of black money that was generated by income that has not been declared to the tax authorities to be tackled. Demonetization had several successes that were changes in the use of digital payments methods across the categories. The number of new income taxpayers also increased, and the taxable income post demonetization also increased. Demonetization also raised the cost of non-compliance with the taxes, and the black money which was generated and which was ultimately used to evade the property taxes has now been brought under the ambit with the growing online transactions. So digitalization of economy, formalization of economy, increase of tax population and the taxation ratio, and the compliance with the taxes along with a dent to the black economy was seen as a success of demonetization. However, demonetization also had several negative impacts that were analyzed by various economists in the country and also was analyzed by former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. The Economic Survey also contains a chapter on demonetization at that time. The first impact of demonetization was aggregate demand shock, the second was supply shock, and the third was the uncertainty shock. The first impact was demand shock because it reduced the supply of money and affected the private deal. Further, demonetization has a more negative impact on the informal economy as it works primarily on cash, and there were reports of job losses, decline in farm income, and social disruption due to demonetization. The second impact was the aggregate supply shock, as cash is a necessary input for any economic activity, and the absence had negative impact on economic activity and led to the overall decline in the productivity. And the third was the uncertainty shock because of the uncertainty that was propelled in the mind of consumers. Several consumers postponed their purchases and put off their investment, and this led to an aggregate wealth shock. Further, in the recent RBI report, it was highlighted that the currency within the public has increased to a level of 30.88 lakh crore in October 21, which is higher than the currency in circulation at the time of demonetization, that is during November 4, 2016, which was hovering around 17.7 lakh crore rupees. The same RBI report also highlighted that though the digital payments have been gradually increasing in the recent year, both in value as well as in volume, data also suggests that during the same time, currency in circulation to the GDP ratio has also increased in consonance with the overall economic growth. It is observed that India has witnessed significant increase in digital transaction, although digital payments to GDP ratio in the country has still remained low, and the level of currency in circulation has increased post demonetization. The other impact that was felt out of the demonetization was shattered faith and confidence that hundreds of millions of Indians has reposed in the government of India to protect them and their money. Basically, the underlying premise behind the decision that was made for demonetization to render the rupee 500 and 1000 currencies as illegal overnight seemed to be a false notion. It was seemed to be false as all cash is black money and all black money is in cash, which was far from reality. The second major impact of demonetization was on the informal sector. More than the 90% of India's workforce still earn their wages in cash. These consist of hundreds of millions of agriculture workers, construction workers, and so on. And there are still more than 600 million Indians who live in a town or village with no bank. Cash is thus the bedrock of the lives of these people. Their daily subsistence depends on cash at that point of time, and they also save their money in cash. And this section was primarily affected from the effect of demonetization. Further, the evidence from the past attempts has shown that large majority of this unaccounted wealth or the black money is not stored in the form of cash. As we have discussed in the first point, all money is not in cash and only a tiny fraction is in cash. Thus, the demonetization was seen as a grievous injury to the honest Indian who earns his or her wages in cash and had a less impact on the dishonest black money holder, as there are also various other ways where the black money was passed in the form of property, gold. The last impact of the demonetization was the consumer confidence. Now, consumer confidence is an important economic variable in nation's growth prospect. And it was observed that a sudden overnight ban on currency has dented the confidence of hundreds of millions of the Indian consumers. Thus, we have seen what was the negative impact of the demonetization, where we have seen the aggregate demand, supply and uncertainty shock. We have also seen the positive effects of the demonetization, which were digitalization, increasing tax to GDP ratio, increasing number of taxable persons, and a dent to corruption also. And we have also seen what was the dissenting judgment as given by Justice B.V. Nagaratna and why the decision regarding the demonetization was upheld by the majority. Moving on to the last article of the day that has appeared on the page 12 of the Hindu, basically talks about the National Commission of Scheduled Tribe, which has held its ground on impact of new rules on Forest Right Act. Now the article is in news because the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change in June 2022 notified forest conservation rules under the Forest Conservation Act 1980. The Forest Conservation Rules repealed and replaced the earlier 2003 rules and its amendments that were later brought in. Now, in the same case, the National Commission on Scheduled Tribe has highlighted that the forest conservation new rules that were floated in 2022 are in violation of the Scheduled Tribes and other forest dwellers recognition of Forest Right Act of 2006, as the new rules have done away with the consent of Gram Sabha for diversion of forest land for the other purpose. Now this topic is important as it falls under the GS2 section and basically talks about the government policies for the help of vulnerable section. Under this article, we will try to understand what are the arguments in favor for the forest conservation rules and what are the arguments against the same. Also, we will try to understand the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 and the Forest Rights Act of 2006. The Forest Conservation Act of 1980 was enacted to help conserve the country's forest. It strictly restricted and regulates the dereservation of forest or the use of forest land for non-forest purposes without the prior approval of the center. Secondly, the Scheduled Tribes and other forest dwellers recognition of Forest Right Act, or commonly referred to as Forest Right Act 2006, recognizes the rights of the forest dwelling tribal communities and other traditional forest dwellers to forest resources on which these communities were dependent. Basically, they are dependent on these forests for their livelihood, habitation, as well as other social and cultural needs. The Act further enjoins upon the Gram Sabha, that is, it gives the power to Gram Sabha and the right holders the responsibility for the conservation and the protection of biodiversity, wildlife, forest, and adjoining catchment areas, water resources, etc. So basically, as the tribals live in the symbiotic relationship with the forest, the Act has given the powers to the Gram Sabha and the right holders to ensure its conservation and protection. Further, the Gram Sabha has been given enormous power and is a highly empowered body under the Forest Right Act, enabling the tribal population to have decisive say in determination of local policies and the schemes that are impacting them. So the Forest Right Act of 2006 provided responsibilities as well as powers to the Gram Sabha for determination of local policies and schemes that will safeguard the interest of tribals against the government scheme. Now, the National Commission on Scheduled Tribe highlights that the new forest conservation rules are violative of this principle as it dilutes the power of the Gram Sabha. We'll now try to understand what are some of the arguments that are in favor and some of the arguments that are against the proposed conservation rules. The arguments in the favor as given by the government is that the rules have been framed under the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 and the National Commission of Scheduled Tribe apprehension of these rules in violation of the Forest Right Act of 2006 is not legally tenable. Basically, the government wants to say is that the changes that have been brought in is with regard to the Forest Conservation Act of 1980 and not of the Forest Right Act of 2006. Thus, the apprehension of the National Commission of Scheduled Tribes are misplaced. The second argument which the government gives is that the new rules have been promulgated to streamline the approval process, introduce the concept of collective decision making, and address the dynamic changes in ecological values of trees as well as forests. Thus, this streamlined decision making will reduce the final amount of time that is required and reach the final decision at an earlier level. However, there are also reasons against the forest conservation rules. The first reason that has been highlighted by the National Commission of Scheduled Tribe is that it has done away with the power of Gram Sabha or the consent of Gram Sabha. It has done away with the clause of mandatorily seeking the consent of the Gram Sabha before stage 1 clearance or even stage 2 clearance. The second reason highlighted here is that it will lead to cutting of trees for the commercial purposes. Now, the National Commission of Scheduled Tribe is apprehensive that this new rules will allow private developers to cut down forests without getting consent of the forest dwellers, and a change that violates the provisions of the Forest Right Act also. The third issue highlighted by the National Commission of the Scheduled Tribe is that between 2009 and 18, 128 applications for a forest diversion for mining, 74 out of them were cleared, and none of the rejections were based on the Forest Right Act non-compliance. The new act, as apprehended by National Commission of Scheduled Tribe, will only increase such violations and thus will further dilute the application of the Forest Right Act of 2006, though the government is safeguarding its decisions as being non-violative of the Forest Right Act, but rather changing the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. With this, we have seen what are the arguments that have been placed by the National Commission on Scheduled Tribe regarding the powers of Gram Sabha and the commercial exploitation of these forests with further dilution of the Forest Right Act. And we have also seen the arguments put forward by the government to streamline the process and not legally violative of the Forest Right Act.